laboratory, so more hands-on based work. So today, I'll just be talking about more wet lab skills and how does research work specifically. So we can go ahead and get started. So I'll be walking you guys through setting up a reaction. So we'll be going over some protocols, setting up the reaction, monitoring it, purification, cleaning up, characterization, biological assays, and a quick conclusion. So we can go ahead and get started. So before you enter a lab, what is the first thing you have to do? You can go ahead and type it in the chat or just say it out loud, either works. Okay, I see PPE, washing hands. Those are all really great. That's pretty much what you have to do. And tying hair back is also very important. So before you enter a lab, you need to have safety precautions in mind. There are three main things that you put on as PPE or protective equipment. The first is gloves. Now keep in mind that gloves are semi-permeable, meaning that when you wear them, some chemicals can still seep through. Therefore, you wash your hands not only after wearing the gloves, but also before wearing them. You also have goggles, because when working with chemicals, they're exposed to your eyes, and that can cause not only blindness, but also muscle damage. So if a reaction splashes, protecting your eyes is always first priority. And of course, you have your lab coat. Chemicals can stick to your clothes, or if there's a spill, it can immediately burn through them. So it's very important never to leave any bare skin showing. Some other things that were in the chat to always keep in mind are closed-toe shoes, so there's no bare skin. And if you have long hair, keeping it tied back, because if this does fall into the chemical reaction, that can cause damage to your skin and your hair. So we've put on our safety equipment. Now let's touch upon the materials that we'll be using in the lab today. So go ahead and type what is this first piece of equipment on the left-hand side? Yes, that is correct. This is called a round bottom flask. Ideally, this is where you conduct most of your reactions. Now, can anyone tell me what this is right here, the more triangular based one? Yeah, I see beaker in the chat. Actually, this is not called a beaker. This is an Erlenmeyer flask. A beaker is simply just a very small straight one. As you see with the neck, this is an Erlenmeyer. Now, does anyone want to give a go to the next two? Perhaps just type it in the chat, but these are not as commonly known. Actually, Jana got it right. This is not a hot plate. This is a stir plate and a stir bar. I see those in there. So a stir plate allows you to stir your reaction, and a stir bar pretty much stirs it by using magnets. Now, of course, we have our spatulas, we have our scale, and then one last one. What do you think this? Yeah, stir plates can also be hot plates. I see Anika typing it in the chat. This is a fume hood. This is actually not an incubator. Incubators are more commonly used in biolabs. So now that we've established what's in our lab, let's go into setting up the actual reaction. So there's three main steps when you first set it up. The first is obviously to clean out your round bottom flask, because if there's any product remaining from a previous reaction, that can impact yours, like even very small amounts. So you want to clean out any materials you're using, your round bottom, but also your spatula, the scale. And the next thing to do is to measure out your materials on weighing paper, which is what I'll touch upon in the coming slides. And lastly, we want to set up the correct conditions. So let's touch upon measuring out your materials. So as we saw before, you usually measure these out on an analytical scale. So ideally, you never place things directly on the scale. You add a piece of weighing paper and then you tar the scale, as you see on the button right here, causing the scale to go down to 0 so there are no additional measurements, and then you measure it out by opening the door and placing your compound inside. Now this happens only when your compound is solid, obviously, but to get the correct measurements, you always want to close the door. Keep in mind that keeping the door open will cause unnecessary air to enter, so you want to keep the door closed, and your measurement at most scales often look like this. And then you know that, for example, if I wanted 0.2 grams, this is probably pretty accurate as far as we can go. But now, how do you propose measuring out your compound if it's a liquid? You can go ahead and type that in the chat. So I see graduated cylinders, flask or beaker, graduated. Yeah, those are all really great ways. The main ones that you often use are these three methods. So it really depends on the amount you're trying to put in. So as we know, there are 1,000 microliters in a single milliliter. Now let's say we only wanted 13 microliters of a solvent in our reaction. In that scenario, you would use a micropipette, which is what you use for any measurements that vary around 10 to 500 microliters, since these are way too small to get accurately in a graduated cylinder or in a syringe. Now, if you're trying to measure out 0.1 ml or 0.5 ml, you would use a syringe. These are a bit more accurate than graduated cylinders, and they're used for very small amounts as well. Now, if you're trying to measure out like 5 ml or 10 ml, even like 100, you would use a graduated cylinder and a pipette. So it really depends on the measurement of what you're trying to measure out for you to decide which one of these you want to use. So now let's touch upon a few of the common solvents. So we often hear that water is the universal solvent, but that's not necessarily always true. The most common solvents that you see in a laboratory are hexane, ethyl acetate, THF, also known as tetrahydrofuran, DCM, dichloromethane, also known as methylene chloride, or acetone. The reason these are used are due to their polarity. Oftentimes, when you're working with TLCs, which I'll touch upon in later slides, it really depends on the polarity of your compound. So just keep these in mind as the most common solvents you often see in the chemistry lab. But now, once we have everything in our round bottom flask, we have to set up our, once we have everything in a round bottom flask, we have to set our reaction to stir. So keep in mind that the stir bar and the stir plate are magnetic. Ideally, if you see at the bottom, we have rounds per minute or rotations per minute, which is pretty much like how fast or how many rotations are going to happen per minute, as the name says. So make sure to keep a stir bar that fits in your round bottom. You plop the stir bar in, you place it to stir, and it stirs your reaction for you. But keep in mind of what I said earlier, where are we setting this reaction up? Any ideas? Okay, so when it comes to setting the reaction up, you always want to use a fume hood. Now, the reason you use a fume hood is because of toxic materials. It prevents contamination and it allows the usage of gas. So ideally, when you're working with toxic materials, you never want those to enter the air in case you inhale them. So a fume hood allows the air to go directly up because there's constant circulation, causing you to never inhale these toxic materials. It also prevents contamination because anything in the air, for example, sometimes even oxygen, can cause you to accidentally oxidize something in your reaction. Therefore, this prevents it from ever happening. And lastly, it allows the usage of gas, more importantly, argon or nitrogen, which I'll touch upon in later slides. So even if you use a fume hood, what else should you do to your reaction when you set it to stir? Any ideas? Yeah, so even if you have your reaction in fume hood, keep in mind that you want to cover it with a stopper, or these black things you see on the slide. This prevents your solvent from evaporating, prevents toxins from leaving, and from other gases from entering your reaction. Using these stoppers also allows for a way to syringe things straight into your reaction without exposing them to air, something that will be very important when we touch upon it on future slides. So now, what happens if your solvent evaporates very quickly? For example, if you're using something known as acetonitrile, when you heat it up, it evaporates almost momentarily. So if your solvent evaporates, you would use something called a condenser to reflux your reaction. Ideally, what this means is that you place this on top of your round bottom flask, and these twirls or spirals allow the solvent to be captured in it and drip back down, causing no solvent or barely minimal solvent from ever evaporating. But keep in mind, this isn't effective against compounds sensitive to air, or more importantly, sensitive to oxygen, which is present in the air around us. So let's take a quick example. Suppose I'm using methyl magnesium bromide, which is a Grignard reagent. So ideally, this reagent is explosive when it's in contact with water or air because it reacts with the water or moisture to form flammable methane gas. And it also the heat from the reaction can ignite to produce methane. It's also extremely toxic when inhaled or near the eyes, so you can't actually take it outside of the fume hood at any point, but you also can't let it be exposed to air at any point. So do you guys have any ideas how I would transfer this from the bottle to my round bottom flask without ever exposing it to air or myself? Okay, I see glove box. Any other ideas? Actually, one of the best ways to do this is a technique known as schmeck technique. So this is used for handling of air or water-sensitive chemicals, which methyl magnesium bromide is. So let's take a look at this picture on the right. It's a bit hard to see at first, but this is our round bottom flask and this is our stopper. Ideally, we add in one syringe on one side, and this is connected to a tube, or for example, like an outlet that pushes argon in. Now, since we're adding argon into the round bottom flask, that means there's no longer any oxygen in it, meaning that it can't react. But now, if we continue flushing in argon, where's the air going to go? We have a pressure release needle right next to it to cause the pressure to be released so you can constantly add in argon to prevent any oxygen from ever entering. But now, let's say I want to take the methyl magnesium bromide from the bottle straight into the round bottom. What I would do is I would take a syringe and push it straight through the cap. Chemicals like these are packed so that you can push it through the cap and the cap immediately reseals itself after you're done. So I use the tip of the needle, push it through, take out my solvents, and since it's in the syringe, it isn't exposed to air during that time, and I would use this place where the pressure release needle is to add in my syringe there and pipette it directly into my reaction where there's argon. This is a very tedious process, but this is ideally how you would allow no sort of exposure to air or to water, since water should not be in your reaction to begin with. So now we've set up our reaction, right? We measured up our materials, we set up our reaction, we set up the correct conditions in case it has to be underneath argon or nitrogen. And just like to reiterate, a reactant is the stuff that goes into your reaction and the product is what comes out. So now what comes next? So keep in mind that a reaction progresses similar to a bell curve. Ideally, this is when your reactants are reacting, boom, you have your compound, right? This is what you want, that's your product. But if you let it stir for too long, it begins to decompose and return back to its starting materials. So ideally, you want to capture that time frame where it isn't your starting material, but it isn't decomposing. You want that point where this is where your compound is. This is where you use something called thin layer chromatography or TLC. Ideally, this is a way that uses silica gel to tell you whether your reaction is done. So while this may look like a bunch of dots, which are currently underneath UV light, let's dissect this a bit further. These first two dots are our starting material. More supposedly, this is isotoic anhydride and N-acetyl-L-tryptophan and acetonitrile. So we see that the isotoic anhydride dot is right here, and the tryptophan one is right here, and this is my product, right? So I know that my product is done when there aren't any spots from the starting material in my product. But I can see two spots right here, right? And those correspond to these two spots over here, meaning that my reaction is not done because there is still starting material inside of it. When my reaction is done, I won't have any of these two dots right here because they'll be gone because there isn't any other starting material left in my reaction. Now, this is a bit confusing to understand, so let's just do a quick example. So can anyone tell me if this reaction is done? And if so, and even if not, what spot is the product? You can just go ahead, type it in the chat or say it out loud. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I see Richard and Jonathan's answer in the chat, and that is correct. The reaction is not done. Now, for those of you who didn't quite get that, we can see the small streak here is the starting material. This is a co-spot, which has both, and this is the product. Ideally, you know that your reaction is not done when the co-spot and the product dots look the exact same. Now we see the streak right here, which is what we don't want because that's our starting material, correct? But this dot right here isn't present in the starting material, meaning that this is our product. So ideally, we know this reaction is done when there isn't a streak there, but there's only one single dot. So let's assume our reaction is now completed. What's the next step? It's actually purification. So we add solvent into our reactions, but the solvent isn't there in the final product. So you would use a machine known as a rotovap to actually take the solvent out. Ideally, this is attached to a vacuum and there's dry ice in this area right here, and you add your round bottom right here, the vacuum holds it in and the dry ice allows the solvent to drip down. This water bath right here will be heated to the boiling point of your solvent so that it evaporates very quickly. So ideally, if you have this huge round bottom filled with liquid up till here, once you're done, it'll end up looking like this. Just smaller crystals that will allow, there will be no solvent in it, and it will be a pure solid form of what your product should be. So now let's say we've rotovapped it, but let's go back to this TLC. What if there are two spots? Do we know, how would we figure out which one is our product? Any thoughts? This one's a bit more of a difficult question, so. Yeah, so you would use something known as column chromatography. This is pretty much just a giant TLC. This is all silica gel, and you add your compound on top, and the solvent that the silica gel is packed on is based on the polarity of your compound. Now keep in mind how I mentioned that all of the solvents I listed out before have different polarities. Now you would use the silica gel to trap anything that isn't your product into it. And you can see right here, this stuff isn't what we want. This, however, at the bottom is our product, and then we take it out and we would use that. And the rest of the stuff that we don't want will be trapped within the silica gel due to the polarity of our compound and the polarity of the silica gel. So now let's say we have completely finished everything, it's completely purified. What's next? First off, we have to clean up. So usually we will clean our round bottoms or columns or spatulas out with acetone first. Then we would use soapy water. The reason we use acetone first is in case anything in there can react with soapy water. Then you would first wash it out with acetone, add soapy water, and then you rinse it again with acetone, since acetone evaporates almost immediately and it doesn't leave any stains. So now we'll repeat this until our round bottom is clear and we put it out to dry. That's pretty much all you have to do to clean up. Just keep in mind that when you're dumping this, you cannot dump it into a sink. You have to dump it into a specialized area, which you then need like government permission to dump, since all of these are very toxic materials. Okay, so we've completely cleaned up. We have our compound. We think it's correct because by the TLC, it looked correct. But how can we tell that it's completely correct? Like, how are we 100% sure this is our compound and we don't have some random thing or some random side product? This is where characterization comes in. So it's the process of defining the chemical properties of one or more components of a substance or device material. Now that doesn't make much sense when you first hear it, but this is ideally using an NMR. So let's touch quickly on what an NMR is and what it does. So an NMR stands for nuclear magnetic resonance. It's an instrument that allows the molecular structure of material to be analyzed. So pretty much when you add it into the NMR, you end up with a graph that looks like this, and each one of these carbons associates to a different peak. Ideally, this is a bit complex to understand, but you have like doublets and triplets and quartets that allow you to identify, oh, this is my amine right here. This is my functional group. And pretty much if your NMR has all of the components of the molecule you're supposed to make, you know that your reaction is correct. So how does that really work? Let's say I have my compound, right? I would first dissolve it in deuterated chloroform or deuterated, like a deuterated substance, and we pop it into one of these NMR tubes. They're about this big, relatively small, and very fragile. Once I add it in, I pop it in right here, and you see the front screen looks like this. All of these different components, like observed nucleus, locked nucleus, solvents, refer to the type of NMR you're trying to get, since that varies per compound. Once you're done, you're left with a graph that looks like this, which you characterize based on the molecular structure of your compounds. So now we've completely characterized our product. It is 100% correct. So we've checked it by NMR. It's completely purified. What comes next? Now, all of our reactions are actually based to create medicinal effects, right? So there are 3 different types of assays. I've listed them out, but does anyone want to give a shot? Why are Kirby-Bauer assays effective? Does anyone know what they are? Anyone want to give a shot at Kirby-Bauer? Okay, well, a Kirby-Bauer assay is an antibacterial assay. Ideally, this is what you use if you think your compound has antibacterial effects, and pretty much you use this to test it. Pretty much, well, ideally what you do is that you take agar or agar-agar powder, which sometimes you see in food, not as often, and you put that into a petri dish, and you allow bacteria to grow on it, and then add your compound in molar dilutions and come back and see if bacteria grew around where you added your molar dilutions. If it does, that means your compound isn't antibacterial, but if it does, it means your compound is antibacterial. The next one is Jurkat cells, also known as cancer cells. This is how you test whether your compound has anti-proliferative activity, meaning that it kills off cancer cells. The last one, which is not as well known, is an MTT assay, which tests the cellular metabolic activity of an assay just to test if your compound has metabolic activity, which is often not used that much, only in natural product synthesis. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. And I know that was a lot, so I can take any questions now in the chat. So I'll just scroll up. So I see a question that, isn't there a safer way to dispose of the chemicals without harming nature? As of now, where you dispose of them, they do have set like places or landfills where you dispose of them. But yes, there isn't actually a way to dispose of them without hurting nature, since they're very toxic in their nature. Like, these are natural products. They're just so toxic when they're in the pure form that we just have designated landfills to throw them out to. Yeah, it's really hard to keep the chemical waste. Is it because it inhibits the bacterial growth, so it's more controlled? Do you mind re-asking that question by any chance? I didn't quite understand. Is this more MCAT exam material? This is actually not presented, I believe, not on the MCAT. This is more used in research base. So ideally, when you're working in a lab, either as a high schooler, an undergrad, or in medical school, these are the basic skills you would use in biochemistry and also in chemistry. How are experiments organized at a lab? That's a really great question. Usually when you're working in a laboratory group, you have these set and you have like protocols and you go in, and it really varies by lab. Different labs have different resources. Some might not have NMRs. Some have even more advanced spectroscopy like LCMS. I'm just saying stuff now, but it really depends on your lab, and it does take some time to get used to. So I think like if you ever go into research, it's really important to ask questions and ask the people there who have been longer. So I see a question. What grade do you do labs on these topics? So this isn't actually something you would do in school. This is an untraditional sort of method. As we've heard from our guest speakers, a lot of them pursue research outside of like their undergrad or their high school, right? This is something almost as an extracurricular. So it really depends on what grade you start research in is when you're going to start using these skills. Oh, okay. I see the Kirby-Bauer. I have a few questions on NMR and chromatography, on practice MCAT, so interpreting peaks and results. Actually, Roxanne, if I could send you some of the resources that I use, certainly NMRs and chromatography are a bit confusing, but I will try and answer any questions you have right now for chromatography. And for NMRs, I would say that really comes from practice. Analyzing those peaks and some of the more complex ones, really like they take really long. But I'll try and answer any of the questions if you want to go ahead and type them in the chat. And Annika, it's really nice to see that like you're experienced on any of these. So for research, will we have to know and memorize off the equipment entirely? And how would you know when to use them? This is actually a really great question. So when it comes down to like memorizing this, it's not something you have to sit down and memorize beforehand. I would say memorizing them really comes from like practice, like constantly going into the lab. And over time, you learn like, okay, this is an Erlenmeyer. This is where my thermometers are kept. And how would you know when to use them? Another thing that I'll keep on repeating is that research really comes from experience. It's just time and time again going into the lab, learning, reading literature off the stuff. It's really just how much work you put in, how much time you spend in the lab, and how much literature you read beforehand. That really comes down to when you want to use, how you use certain things, when you want to use them. But I would say you really just, the best way to learn in research is just through the experience. Like you can go in without any experience and still learn a ton. Yeah, so I think those are all of the questions that are in the chat for now. So I'll be handing it over to Davina for the next workshop. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to just reach out and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maher. So that workshop will also be posted in our session resources. So if you forget what a lab technique is, or you forget how to interpret a graph, don't worry, that's going to be uploaded after our session today. And also just a quick note that all of our guest speaker slideshows have now been uploaded into our Google Drive. We're waiting on one more, I think, but everyone else's has been, including Becky's from last Monday. She was the MD PhD neurologist. So now we're going to go into our triaging workshop, and then we're going to hear from Taryn. So I will share my screen and we'll get started. All right, so welcome to our triaging workshop. Like our mock diagnosing one, this is going to involve you playing the role of an emergency medical healthcare professional at the scene of an emergency. Okay, so to kind of get started, what actually is triaging? So it's a process that's used by hospitals, emergency rooms, other healthcare systems to determine the order in which patients should be treated at the scene of an emergency. So this is seen a lot in Grey's Anatomy. I don't know if you see them explicitly triaging anyone, but you get to the scene of a mass casualty, and you see that there are tons of different patients there and who have different medical needs. So triaging is very helpful because if you didn't have this technique, you might stand there and think, okay, who am I supposed to go to first? Who needs more help than somebody else, etc. So it's very helpful. All right, so here are our general triage categories. It's pretty simple because they're all based on color. So we'll start with the worst case scenario, which is unsalvageable or a black tag. So each patient will get a tag, and this tag determines what kind of medical care they're going to need and what condition they're in. So if a patient has received a black tag, you're on the scene of an emergency, you just start with the person right in front of you. It means that they're not breathing and they're essentially deceased. So that basically means that you don't think there's any chance that they have, a chance of living or any chance of successful resuscitation. And some other things to note are that if you ever come across a patient and you're able to see brain matter, or you know that they're bleeding internally and it's extremely severe, or you know that they have bleeding from their heart or their lung is severely punctured, you might also give them a black tag there. So that's the medical equivalent of deceased. The next scenario is where you get a critical tag or a red one. So this is where their condition is pretty life-threatening. The patient is severely unstable. They must be seen immediately, either for emergency surgery. They could be unresponsive, in respiratory distress, or in declining mental status, but they're not unsalvageable yet. All right, our next scenario is where it's emergent, or they get an orange tag. So this is where the condition is potentially life-threatening. They should be seen as soon as possible within 10 minutes of you arriving on the scene of an emergency, and they will most often need testing or medication. And again, this is still pretty severe, so any delay in care is harmful to the patient. Like we've been talking about in our previous workshops, one of the most important things when you go and you see patients and you're at the scene of an emergency is time. Time is critical. And our next category, which kind of leads us into this, is urgent or yellow. So their condition is acute, not necessarily as severe as someone who might be getting an orange or a red tag. The patient should be seen urgently within 30 minutes to a few hours, and they might require some testing or medication, but they're often discharged after receiving some kind of medical attention from a healthcare professional. And then this is our kind of best case scenario. So non-urgent walking wounded, that's what we refer to them as. So this is a green tag. So it means that they're stable and their condition is not as severe. The patient does not need to be quickly seen, often requires testing and medication, and they're expected to be discharged after receiving minimal attention. So this is basically where you get to the scene of an emergency. Maybe someone has a couple scratches on their arm, or they might need a stitch or two, but really they're talking, their reflexes are good, they don't seem to be in any state of shock, so they're kind of good to go after you just give them a quick roundup and then they're off. All right, so now you're all going to get the opportunity to kind of play the role of someone who's triaging on the scene of an emergency, and we're going to give you some case studies, and your job is to determine what color tag they would be receiving based on the color schemes that we just talked about. All right, so here's patient 1. So you're at the scene of a natural disaster. There's a 14-year-old male who walks into an emergency tent with a broken arm. Vital signs are normal. All other extremities are undamaged. The patient is fully aware of the situation and does not seem to be in any kind of distress. So what category or what tag would you give them? Seeing a lot of green and yellow. Glad nobody said it was black. Yeah, so definitely seeing a lot of green and yellow. So yeah, most of you are correct. It's patient 1 would be tagged as non-urgent because, again, this is what we define as the walking wounded. So they don't need to be seen for any kind of emergency care, anything that's immediate, etc. All right, so here is our second patient. Also at the scene of a natural disaster, there's a 73-year-old man who's found lying under debris with several lacerations showing on his outer body. Additionally, brain matter is visible on the top of his head. This is also something we talked about, so it's kind of a hint. And the patient is unresponsive. So what category would he be tagged in? Yeah, I'm also only seeing one response in the chat, so you're all correct. Yeah, so this patient would be receiving a black tag. They would be tagged as unsalvageable because he's clearly suffered a wound that no individual can, unfortunately, with the medical technology that we have today, survive with any medical treatment or care. And while, of course, age is taken into consideration, any patient with these kind of injuries would be given this tag. All right, so our third patient is a police officer who's wheeled into the emergency room with a gunshot wound in her left shoulder. The bullet is suspected to still be in her body, and the patient complains of tingling in her left arm. She's lost a significant amount of blood. She's now beginning to shift in and out of consciousness. She has a history of deep vein thrombosis and takes Coumadin, which is a blood thinner. And she also states that she smokes daily. So there are a lot of symptoms going on here, a lot of things that are going on with her medical history. So what category do you all think she should be tagged in? Yeah, so this is another good indicator of how we differentiate between black and red or red and orange. So with the black tag, there's basically no hope for survival, but with a red tag, we do see some hope. And in this case, you're all correct in that it would be a red tag, but it's still critical. So this doesn't mean that her injuries are non-threatening. It just means that with medical intervention, she has a good chance of recovery. So her taking blood thinners and smoking further would increase her risk of serious complications from her injury and any post-surgery or post-medical care. So care must be given immediately. All right. Here is patient 4. So there's a 57-year-old female who enters the emergency room on a wheelchair with a deformed tibia and fibula. So can anyone tell me where you would find the tibia and the fibula? Seeing different colors and body parts in the chat. Yeah, exactly, everyone, in your leg. So it's always helpful if you find anatomy and physiology to be interesting to maybe have a body chart with you. So if you ever get lost in determining which part of the body a medical chart or someone is referring to, you can have it open there. But yes, everyone's correct about the leg. So the patient cannot walk on her own. She states that she has some ongoing pain in the affected area. Her vital signs are normal and she does not appear to be in any distress. So what category do you guys think? Seeing a lot of yellow, orange. I haven't seen any green yet. Just only yellow. And yeah, this category would be yellow. So she would be tagged as urgent, not labeled as walking wounded because she physically cannot walk because of her tibia and fibula injuries, but she's still mentally aware and responsive to pain. Her condition is not potentially life-threatening because there doesn't seem to be any distress to her vital signs, but she still should be seen swiftly. All right, so there's another patient, and in this case, a family shows up to the emergency room with their 4-month-old daughter who consumed half a bottle of aspirin pills. She apparently climbed out of the portable crib during nap time and somehow reached an open bottle of baby aspirin, which of course is something that should never happen. Please just be careful around smaller children because they do tend to climb into things and take things that are open. So just making sure that the environment around children is safe is very important. But getting back into the case study, so the patient or the baby is quiet, breathing is shallow, quick pulse changes are noted, and the patient is drooling and has occasional tremors or convulsions. So what category do you all think? Yeah, seeing a lot of red. Yeah, I think I'm only seeing red so far. All right, so we'll show you all what it is. And you're correct, it is red. She would absolutely be tagged as critical given the fact that her vital signs seem to be very distressed, shallow breathing, convulsions. It's clear that she must be treated immediately. And this is another important thing, especially for newborns. So chemical toxicity must be handled very quickly in order to protect the immediate and long-term health of the patient. So just please keep that in mind around smaller children and newborns. All right, so here is patient 6. So you're at the scene of a mass casualty earthquake, and you have a 35-year-old man who's found with no apparent injuries. He does not seem to have a pulse and is unresponsive to commands and questions. So based on our color tags, what category would you place him in? Yep, seeing a lot of black. Not seeing anything else. Yeah, you guys are pretty unanimous in the chat. And you're all correct. So patient 6 would be tagged as unsalvageable. Because this is a mass casualty incident with many individuals needing medical attention, resuscitation cannot likely be performed without endangering the lives of other patients. So this is another thing to take into consideration. So when you're on the scene of an emergency, the tagging process might be different depending on whether or not you have 2 patients there or 200. So this is another good thing to keep in mind. All right, here's our 7th patient. So a 16-year-old male shows up to the emergency room with 2nd and 3rd degree burns across 80% of their body. So the patient's vitals are slightly elevated and he's slipping in and out of consciousness. What category would he be tagged in? Okay, seeing a little bit of a mix this time, red and orange. Mostly red for right now. All right, so we'll show everyone what it is. All right, so for this category, we would actually label it either orange or yellow. So they would be tagged as emergency or urgent. So while burns are obviously life-threatening, the patient is not tagged as critical because he may not survive his injuries entirely. So the emergent or urgent categories allow the patient to be seen pretty quickly without taking emergency room resources for a critical patient who might have a higher chance of surviving. So this one was pretty tricky because I know a lot of you said red. But again, care still must be given as immediately as it possibly can and as immediately as resources become available. All right, so that concludes our mock triaging workshop. Again, these slides will be posted in our Google Drive, so you don't have to worry about forgetting what the difference is between red and orange or orange and yellow. We'll provide everything for you there, and you can check that out later. Maybe go through them all again and take notes on it if you would like to. But for right now, we are going to have Taryn, who is our guest speaker today, come and talk to us about her journey into medicine, as well as any advice she has. And of course, you can raise your hand if you have questions for her or use the chat. But we'll get started with Taryn.
Hello, everyone. So sorry for being so late. I was driving across Washington State furiously and got stuck in some traffic, but glad we were able to fill the time. But yeah, as Davina said, my name is Taryn Meacham. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And yeah, I'm here to just see some people from Washington State. Hi. Hi, fellow friends from Washington. So yeah, I just have some slides kind of going through my journey and some things I learned along the way of applying to medical school. And then hopefully we'll leave a good amount of time for questions at the end. So let me just share my screen, get my PowerPoint up. And yeah, feel free to pop your questions in the chat. And then, like I said, there will be time for questions at the end. All right. So this is what I wish I had known pre-med edition. And just a disclaimer that everything I'm about to talk about is just my own perspective and experiences. So don't take everything I say or anyone else says with a grain of salt, because it's just one person's experience. So a little bit about me. It's been a lifelong dream of mine to become a physician. My dad even asked my pediatrician when I was a little kid which med school to go to. So that tells you how long I've been wanting to be a doctor. I graduated from high school in 2012, which probably makes me really old to you guys. But yeah, went to college from 2012 to 2016. And then I took 2 gap years, more on that to come. And then I started med school in August of 2018. Now I am a 4th-year medical student at UW, and I am specifically in Eastern Washington in Spokane, if any of you are familiar. And I live there with my significant other and my 2 kitties, who you can see on the screen. And yeah, some of my future hopes, dreams, plans, goals, I'm planning to go into pediatrics. I'm in the process of applying for that right now. Really want to establish a good work-life family balance and want to continue teaching and mentoring, because that's a big passion of mine. All right, so here's a little like 10,000 foot view of my journey to med school. So high school, like I said, I graduated in 2012. I kind of laid out for you so you can see what classes I took, like AP classes I took each year, and then kind of my extracurriculars. And one thing that I should point out is like, I really didn't do a lot of like medically related stuff in high school, despite knowing in high school that I wanted to be a doctor. So I put this out there to just point out that it is totally okay to just engage in your passions in high school. It's great if you can get in some volunteering or shadowing in like a medical field, but if you can't fit it in, if it doesn't work out, like that is totally fine. It's usually in college when you really have to start focusing in on that stuff. And then here is just kind of an overview table of what classes I took when during my 4 years of undergrad. And you can kind of see which general series of classes I took. And then some other volunteer things. So just a couple of things I'll point out. I originally was going to be a bio major and switched to biochemistry in fall of my 3rd year. More on that to come. And some of the things that I was involved in, I did a lot of volunteering through different clubs at my school. I worked as a resident advisor or an RA for housing at my school for 2 years. And then I really started my more medically focused stuff in my 3rd year when I started volunteering at a hospital as a medical like question and answer person at an info desk. And then in my 4th year is when I started getting in more of the like shadowing and hands-on clinical experience and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's just a broad overview. And then in June 2016 is when I graduated with a BS in biochemistry. I worked very briefly as an assistant resident director, so someone who was overseeing the RAs at my school. As like right after I graduated. During that, I was applying to med school, taking my MCAT, And then I actually became a program manager for the Health Scholar program, which is a clinical volunteer program that I had been a student in. That's how I got all my clinical experience. And then I went on to manage the program. And then in my first application cycle, I ended up interviewing at 2 schools. I applied to 14, I think, or 15. And I was outright rejected at one and waitlisted at the other, and then didn't get in, which meant that I had to apply again. And so the next year I reapplied to 14 schools with more shadowing experience and also my new program manager job. And yeah, I interviewed at UW and was accepted, and then yeah, started medical school from there. All right, so that's just a broad overview. You all can ask me more questions later if you have more specific questions about that stuff. But now I'm gonna go over just some misconceptions that I've had, things I've learned along the way that I think is helpful for you all to know at this stage. So misconception number 1, becoming a doctor is the only way to be involved in medicine. So I put this out there because it wasn't until I started volunteering in the hospital that I realized that there are so many different jobs within the medical field. You know, it's really mind-boggling. Like I put up a whole slew of them up here. You know, you have the classic things you think of, like a doctor of medicine or doctor of osteopathic medicine, MD or DO. Those are both types of doctors. There's also physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, nurses, certified nursing assistants, and then all of these other jobs that fall under the umbrella of what we call allied health professions, who really play a key role in taking care of patients in all types of settings. And so I say this not to discourage you from going into medicine, because obviously I learned about all these things and still decided I wanted to be a doctor. But I just want to put it out there that, you know, there are lots of different options. So it's important to, you know, kind of keep an open mind, explore those different things, and really figure out like what's going to fit with your goals, your, you know, future lifestyle that you want, the kind of money you want to be making, the kind of places you want to be living, how long you want to be in school, how much debt you want to be in. All of those are big things to consider. And so it's really great to talk to people when you're, you know, doing your various activities and really get an idea of, okay, what does it mean to be in this profession? Because until you see it or talk to someone in it, you know, it's hard to know exactly what you're getting yourself into. All right. Second misconception is that you have to be a quote unquote hard science major to get into medical school. So as I mentioned before, originally I was a biology major and then decided to go into biochemistry in my 3rd year because I was told by people not super familiar with the medical school process that that biochemistry would make me more competitive than just regular biology. But what I've learned since then is that you can literally major in anything and get into med school as long as you take the Prerec classes. And so here's just kind of a list of the Prerec classes. You have to take like a year of general chemistry, a year of biology, organic chemistry, some physics and upper level math classes. And then different schools have different requirements for like social science or humanities classes. And, you know, every school is a little bit different, but these are the general things that all schools require. And really my best advice is to pick a major that you enjoy. Like in retrospect, biochemistry was difficult for me, not necessarily because, I mean, the classes were very hard, but also it was because I didn't enjoy what I was doing. Like, I think that I would have done much better and been much happier overall, like enjoyed my college experience so much more if I had stuck to biology, because I actually liked biology. So rather than having to take classes in like, you know, crazy chemistry and physics stuff that I didn't enjoy, I could have actually done stuff I liked. And I think I would have had a lot better experience, and I still would have gotten into med school either way. And yeah, I've known people who've majored in all kinds of things like English and music and teaching and blah, blah, blah. So point is, pick something you enjoy and then just figure out a way to incorporate those Prerec classes and you're good to go. Okay, misconception number 3, you have to do, insert here, extracurricular activity to get into med school or to stand out on your application. So this is a huge thing that I hear, that it's like, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z to get into medical school. And, you know, I've come to learn that there are some requirements, things that I think of as hard requirements, and I'll go over those in a second. because they really show that you are dedicated and know what you're getting yourself into. But other than that, you really should only do things that you enjoy. Like very similar to pick a major you enjoy, like pick activities you enjoy. Because you're going to put this stuff on your application and they'll talk about it in your interview, and they can tell if you're actually like passionate about something or if you just did it to say that you did it. And it's much better to talk about your passions and your hobbies and the things you enjoy, and seem like an interesting person rather than just do all these things because you felt like you had to. So really the purpose of the work and extracurricular activities that you do in undergrad should be, one, you have to show that you know what it means to be a doctor and work with patients. And you do that through shadowing physicians and also getting clinical experiences, whether that's paid or volunteer. Second is that you're committed to serving other people through volunteering, and this can be both clinical or medical or completely non-clinical, and I had a mixture of both, and most people do, I think. And then to demonstrate your interests and passions within and outside the field of medicine. So if that's research and publications or teaching or even your hobbies, you should still make time to do those things. And don't feel like you have to do any of those things because, so-and-so said so. Like really, even things like research, that's a big one that I feel like people are like, I have to do research and publish 5 papers in order to get into med school. But my caveat, let me see if I have that. My thing about research is that you should do it if you want to do an MD PhD program, if you want to go to a super competitive school like an Ivy League, or if you want to do it. All valid reasons, but don't do research just because you feel like you have to. I don't think that's like a strong, heavy requirement thing for most schools that you apply to. Again, you'd have to look at the specific schools because some that are more research heavy might require that, but a lot of schools don't. And I just use that as an example because I know that's one I freaked out about. And I did a bunch of research, and because it wasn't something I was passionate about, it never came up. Like I put it on my application and it never came up in the interviews or anything else. So I don't think it was an important part of me getting into med school personally. So yeah, and also, don't worry about trying to stand out because there are so many people applying to med school every year who are doing the same exact activities as you. It's very hard to find something that's like truly unique because there's just so many people. So rather than doing things to stand out or whatever, do it because you enjoy it, and then that'll come out when you go to talk to people in your interviews and in your application. Okay, 4th misconception is that you have to go straight from high school to undergrad to med school. That was my intent when I started undergrad, was to just go straight through, but I got a couple years in and I realized I really needed a break. I wanted to take some time off to work, to finish up my applications and study for my MCAT and do all these things I just didn't have time to do in my busy undergrad schedule. So as I mentioned earlier, I took 2 gap years. One was intentional and one was unintentional. Again, a little more on that to come. But yeah, gap years are truly awesome. And if you don't know what a gap year is, basically it's any years off you take in between either high school and undergrad or undergrad and med school. And a lot of people ask, like, what do I even do in a gap year? And really the answer is whatever you want. A lot of people work and to gain experience and also save up money, which is what I did. You can catch up on volunteering or clinical stuff for research that you didn't get to do. You can, if your grades aren't the best, you can do what's called a post-bac or a master's program to help bump up your scores. Give yourself time off to study for the MCAT. And, even more importantly, travel. Well, maybe not in the pandemic time, depending on how things plan out, but, spend time with family, do things you enjoy and relax, take some time to live your life before you get into med school. So yeah, just the big thing is there's no one path to medical school. Like I know people in my class who went straight through. Most people I'd say were like me, where they took a couple of years off in between. And actually the average age of someone starting med school nationally is like 26 right now. So most people actually did take some time off to work and such before coming to medicine. And then I know people who had completely different careers and, spent 10 years doing whatever and then came back to it. So, it's just a matter of figuring out what works best for you. All right. My last misconception is that you can't become a doctor because of blank reason. So I tell this story to a lot of pre-meds because I think it, it's really important to realize that you will face hurdles on your way to becoming a doctor, but you really cannot let anyone discourage you. So my story was after I got rejected from my dream school, which was UW at the time, and I set up an appointment to talk to one of the directors of admissions of the med school to figure out, okay, what can I do better next time in order to get in? And during that 10-minute conversation with a person I'd never met, who was actively reading my application for the first time as we were on the phone, she somehow came to the conclusion that, and said this to me exactly, I think you should consider something other than medicine. Which is absolutely heartbreaking when I'm coming to her already, so sad that I didn't get into med school, trying to figure out what can I do to be better, to be told, hey, you should just give up right now is horrible. And long story short, I did a lot of soul searching. I did a lot of talking to people that knew me better. And I came to the conclusion that I knew myself better than this director of admissions or these, interviewers who had spent all of 30 minutes with me. And I had to pick up myself off the floor and turn around, and I reapplied the next cycle. And I got into that very same school. I'm now a student at UW, almost done actually. I guess this is a very specific example, but you can get into med school even if the director of your dream school says you can't get in. But just people run into all kinds of obstacles, whether that's bad grades or, a bad MCAT score, you have to take a leave of absence, being non-traditional student, being a first gen student, having to work, facing discouragement from people in your life, COVID disruptions, certainly getting rejected from med school, even multiple cycles. There are people that apply multiple times and get in. But despite these obstacles, you can still get into med school. You just have to, remind yourself that you know yourself better and, keep plugging away if that's what you decide that you want to do with the rest of your life. So yeah, just you got to find that confidence in yourself and just keep going. All right. So I have a couple slides about what you should do next based off of where you are in the system, but I want to pause now and switch to your questions. So let me pull that up. And if anyone, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see. Okay. Rolling back, blah, blah, blah. People saying hi. Or maybe if you put in your question, now might be a great time to add it in. Or if you want to unmute yourself and ask. Oh, thank you for saying my cats are cute. Oh, thanks, guys. Okay. Yeah, so one question that I got, what has been the hardest part of your journey? I think definitely getting rejected and just having to come back from that was so hard. Because honestly, med school is hard, but once you get in to med school, that's a huge hurdle out of your way. So yeah, that is a big deal. What was my most meaningful experience? I think they mean before applying to med school, I'm going to assume. Just for those who are unaware, when you're applying to med school and you're putting in your work and activities, you can put in a bunch of different experiences and then you mark some of them as your most meaningful. Definitely for me, my clinical volunteering experience was a big deal because that was my first time actually getting to work with patients directly and just getting to hear their stories, listen to their lives, and getting to see also the kind of the behind the scenes of how the staff work together to take care of patients was a big deal. And it just really confirmed for me that, yeah, I love being in the clinical experience. And then also my shadowing experiences were really meaningful because it showed me this is an example of what a really great doctor could be and really inspired me to go into it for myself. What is my opinion before doing nursing before med school? I would say you can do nursing before med school. I would say if your ultimate goal is to be a doctor, definitely just go straight to med school. It's such a different path You're going to end up doing a lot of redundant things because oftentimes the like nursing programs at school have you take a like less rigorous version of what you would have to take of the prereqs to get into med school. So yeah, I would say just like believe in yourself, believe that you can do it. You know, there's other ways you can get some clinical experience if that's what you're looking for. You could do things like clinical volunteering or work as like a medical assistant or a certified nursing assistant or something like that. Certainly if you're like already in a nursing program or already in nursing school or a nurse, yeah, totally, like no tons of people who switch career paths, but yeah, I would say if your ultimate goal is to be a doctor, just go straight there. I said that I want to be a doctor from a young age. What drew me to the field? Oh, that is such a good question. Because I'm trying to answer that for myself right now because I'm writing my personal statement for residency. And one of the, you know, you kind of have to talk about your journey for medicine. And I'm like, why did I want to be a doctor? So from what I remember from my little like 7 or 8 year old brain is that like this is going to be a really like cheesy answer, but I loved helping people. Like I really just, you know, and as I've grown older, it's grown into more of a thing where it's like, I like feel the most productive and the happiest and the most like fulfilled with my work when I'm doing stuff that's serving other people and is really making a positive impact on their lives, hopefully. So it's partially that I just love the human body. Like it's so fascinating. I could sit here and tell you all kinds of crazy things that I've learned. And when I started doing like biology classes in high school, I would learn things like, oh, why do we sneeze? Or why do we pass out? And stuff like that. And it was just so like magical to learn like, oh, this is why my body does this. I've always wondered. And it's just like, it's so fascinating. And we don't know everything about the human body. So there's like always new things to learn. And it's just like a really exciting, ever evolving field. And then also just something else I've learned along the way is I really love teaching and mentoring. And there's a lot of that, you know, not just like teaching med students or pre-meds or blah, 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 but you're teaching your patients constantly, you know, it's a constant like puzzle to try to, you know, figure out what's going on and then figure out how you're going to explain it to the patient and like help them make the best decisions and that kind of thing. So I like that part a lot. That and I also really just love working with kids. Like I've loved working with kids since I was a kid. So I've actually said I wanted to be a pediatrician even since I was a little kid, which is kind of weird. Most people don't know. So if you like want to go to med school, but you have no idea what specialty, that's much more normal than me. But yeah, it's just a funny thing. Let's see, next question. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll without scrolling too far. Okay, how does a typical day look like in med school? That is an excellent question. It varies a lot greatly. So just to give you guys an idea of how med school is generally structured, usually the first 2 years you spend in the classroom. So you're attending lectures and then you might have some workshops here and there. You know, you'll spend some time in the anatomy lab dissecting cadavers. You'll do like clinical workshops where you'll learn like the physical exam skills and get to practice those like on your classmates and stuff. And if you're lucky, like my school, we actually got to go like once every other week into either the hospital or to a clinic and work alongside doctors. So it was a mixture of going to lectures, doing these workshops, and then a lot of studying at home for my exams because in med school, during the first 2 years, you pretty much have an exam every week, at least the way my school does it. So yeah, you're studying a lot to try to keep on top of it. That changes in the 3rd and 4th year when you start doing your clinical experiences. So during your 3rd year in particular, you spend time in each of, there's like 6 core rotations. They are internal medicine, which is adult medicine. There is OBGYN, surgery, pediatrics, psychiatry, and family medicine. Those are kind of the core ones that everyone has to do. So you spend a certain amount of weeks working in either a hospital or a clinic or some mixture of the both. And you're working alongside doctors and nursing staff and everyone to take care of your patients and learn. So you're getting a lot more of that hands-on clinical experience. And you continue to do rotations in your 4th year, but that's usually when you do electives. So you get to pick more fun stuff. Like I did a pediatric ER rotation, which was super fun. Right now I'm doing an adolescent medicine rotation, which is focused around care for teenagers. So yeah, I'm and at this point, this far along, basically what happens is I go in and the doctor like sends me in. I do all of the interview myself. I do the physical exam on the patient. Then I go back out and I tell my preceptor, the attending, I tell them what I learned and what I saw in exam. And then this is my assessment of what's going on. And here's my plan for what I want to do about it. And then we go back in together and, you know, they may make tweaks to my assessment and plan, certainly. And yeah, and then we like tell the patient like, hey, here's the plan. And then, you know, do whatever we got to do, put in orders and that kind of stuff and send them on their way. And then I'm also responsible for typing up notes. So it's really like getting me prepared for in less than a year when I'm officially a doctor and in charge. Oh, someone's asking me if I can revisit the slide on gap years. Yes, I can do that. Let me pull that up. Yeah, if there's any other slides, I can also send these to Davina and she can share these with you too. Let me pull that up real quick. Oh, sorry, too far. Okay, yeah, hopefully this is the slide you mean. So I will I'll leave that up for a moment. Other questions? Sorry, I'm trying to find the chat on here. Maybe. Okay. Sorry, I can't really see the chat from the screen. So hopefully the person who wanted to see this got a chance to take a screenshot. So I got to close out of it so I can actually see what questions I have to answer. So if you didn't get it, let me know at the end. And like I said, Davina can send this out to you as well. Oh, here we go. Now I pulled up the chat. All right. I will stop sharing though, so I can see your faces. Okay. How did you find opportunities for volunteering and work? Yeah, great question. A lot of it was just kind of Googling what was out there. I know that's a really lame answer, but like when I was looking for volunteer programs, I literally just Googled like hospital volunteer program Seattle, because that's where I was living at the time, and just searched for stuff there. I also got connected with like the pre-med clubs at my school, and that's where, I'm pretty sure that's when the like program manager for the health scholar program, that clinical volunteer program, they came in and did a presentation. So yeah, getting involved with your local like pre-med club, or your, you can get involved with the pre-med advisor too. Just caution that they're not always the most knowledgeable when it comes to stuff. But yeah, you can do that way, at least to know like what events are coming up. So I attended a lot of pre-med events on campus. And then some of my stuff just came through like the opportunities that I had already established. Like I got the program manager job because I did a really good job in the health scholar program and then applied, you know, through that. And the like doctors that I met, one was a connection through my aunt. I don't have any doctors in my family, so I didn't have that way. And then one time I just went in with my mom for her doctor's visit, and I literally just asked her primary care doctor, like, hey, do you ever let students shadow, and can I shadow you sometime? So you just kind of got to do what you got to do. But yeah, it's just the best advice I can give is like do really well in whatever opportunities you have. And then, you know, don't be afraid to let people that you work with know like, hey, this is what I'm interested in doing. And they can help you find, like, if you're in a clinical setting, they can help you meet doctors that you might want to shadow and that kind of stuff. So that's just like a very strong overview. Ooh, too far. Sorry, I saw one that was like, how are your relationships affected as a pre-med, I believe? Yeah, okay. How did being a pre-med affect your relationships? Sorry, got a drink real quick. Yeah, it's definitely, both pre-med and med school, it definitely affects relationships, like not gonna lie. So I met my boyfriend at the very beginning of college, and we started dating pretty early on in my freshman year. So he kind of knew what he did. I don't think he really knew what he was getting into, but you know, I warned him from the get-go, like, hey, I'm going to be a doctor. You know, I'm planning on doing this, so this is kind of what it entails. And so, you know, for my romantic relationship, it's been a lot of like, and he like moved over here with me for med school, and then he's going to move with me for residency. So yeah, it's just a lot of like communication. And then same thing with like romantic, or actually this is generalizable for any relationship, friends, family, blah, 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 is communication, you know, letting them know like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what my schedule kind of looks like. And then scheduling time to spend, you know, time with family members and friends and significant others and whatnot. Like that's so important. Like I love my family. I'm very close to my family. And so I would make sure that like during holiday breaks and stuff like that, I would go home any chance I got to go see my family, and just made that time. And even med school, I pre-COVID went and saw them pretty frequently. And it's like, you know, if it's important to you, you just got to make time. Or like now in med school, even though I'm super busy, like my boyfriend and I, we do a date night every week, you know, and that's like scheduled, our protected time that we spend together. So you know, I think it can be hard because people don't always understand if they're not in medicine, like the kind of tolls it's going to take. And, you know, you just have to communicate like, this is what's going on. This is the time I have. And with anyone that you live with, like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. I could really use your help with this. You know, I'm really stressed out. Could you help me with this? Can you take on more of the chores or whatever? You know, are you going to residency after med school? Yes. So hopefully. So residency, for those of you who don't know, is what you're required to do after med school. It lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 years, depending on what specialty you go into. And it's where you pick a specialty that you want to go into. Like, I want to be a general surgeon, or I want to be a pediatrician, or whatever, and you do a set number of years focused in on that specialty. And it is a requirement for any future doctor to go through residency. So yeah, I will be attending a 3-year residency after hopefully next year, assuming everything works out. Someone said, I want to pursue pediatrics in the future. Any insights you wouldn't mind sharing? Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I'm not sure what you want in terms of insights, but I think pediatrics is wonderful. I think really good things to do if you want to do a career in pediatrics is like in undergrad, but then also in med school, is to like make sure you do stuff that involves kids, like work with kids, volunteer with kids. You know, like I volunteered at a summer camp between my first and second years of medical school. You know, I got really involved with like teaching kids during my first couple of years of med school. And yeah, so just like make sure you do stuff that involves kids, because then that kind of establishes this history. Even before that, like back when I was a kid, I used to like teach little preschoolers ballet and stuff like that. So, you know, if you can establish this long history of like, hey, I love working with kids and here's all the things that I've done. Yeah, that's a really great way to kind of like sell yourself later on down the line. And also it's just a ton of fun, you know, working with kids, in my opinion. And yeah, it's just so great. Like I love everything from the littlest, tiniest babies to like teenagers. Like it's such a fun field. Do most people have jobs while they're in med school? No, because you don't have time. So med school is your job, basically. It is a at minimum 40 hours a week, more like in the 50 to 60 range, 70 to 80 on a particularly bad week. So you do not have time. The next part of that question was, do people rely on scholarships and grants? Yes. And just like, how do you go about paying for med school? So a lot of it is loans. Yeah. So like I said, I worked a couple of years before med school, was able to save up a good chunk of change that's kind of paid for like my bills. But paying for school, like by the time I'm done with med school, I will probably have like $200,000 in loans, $200,000 in loans. And that's including $30,000 from undergrad that I still need to pay back, which is a lot. and it's scary. But part of, part of going through it all is you do make a really good salary, and you just have to be really smart and cautious with your money. Don't go buying crazy stuff. Like, I'm still driving the same car that I got as a gift like 10 years ago, and it has like crank windows and doors. So I'm still like trying to keep costs down. I don't live in a super fancy apartment or anything. So you just have to be smart. And then, yeah, there's definitely scholarships and grants. I've been actually pleasantly surprised at how much I've gotten through scholarships and grants. So yeah, it's a lot of loans, any money you manage to save up before med school, scholarships and grants, or if you're really lucky, if you have family members who can pay for it. Ignore my cat in the background. Apologies. Did you explore other passions in college or just do academic medical stuff? Yeah, trying to think back in college. I feel like things I didn't really put on that slide. I spent a lot more time with friends. I like just doing random adventures and stuff. I still do take out time to like go to like musical theater and stuff, like back pre-COVID when we like Broadway shows used to come. I would like take time off to like go see the shows and that kind of stuff. Like I said, spending time with family. I like to play video games in my spare time. I like to hang out with my cats, and yeah, it's totally doable to still engage in your hobby, and you should still engage in your hobbies and other passions. Another big passion of mine is teaching, so that's kind of related. I did a lot of like odd random teaching jobs and stuff like that. So yeah, there's definitely time, and you should definitely like do other stuff that you enjoy. Let's see. After your rejection, what did you do during that time that possibly helped you get accepted? Yeah, so the interesting thing is, so I found out I wasn't getting into med school like officially like May of 2017, or no, May of 2016. No, sorry, it would be May of 2017. And then June of 2017 is when the next application opened. So really a short amount of time. Like I kind of knew ahead of time that I was probably gonna have to reapply, but yeah, I didn't officially know until May. So the interesting thing is I didn't do a ton different, or I didn't have like a ton of different experiences. Like I had 8 more hours of shadowing with a different doctor and then my program manager job, but it really wasn't a ton of different experiences. However, what did change was the way that I talked about my experiences. Because one of the other pieces of feedback I got when talking to that director of admissions is that my interviewers felt like I didn't have enough clinical experience or working with patients, which was ridiculous because I had several hundred hours of that. But I realized that the reason they thought that was because I didn't talk about it enough. So when I went to rewrite my applications and my interviews and stuff, excuse me, I really focused in on that, like really brought in a lot of very personal examples from my experiences. That's another thing I did better of, is using specific examples of my certain like experiences I'd had in both my application and my interview. And that really made a big difference in my application, was just how I talked about things. I'm going to take a real quick drink again while I listen to, or look for the next question.
Right,
are you familiar? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think we have time for 2 more questions today.
Okay. Let me scroll. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. Real quick, are the prereqs for each med school on their website? Yes. If you had a nurse, I'm also going to give you guys my email. So if I don't get a chance to answer your question, please email me after the fact. And I'm trying to look for a question that's applicable to lots of people. So pardon me for skipping past some of these questions. Let's see. So, okay, so one question that I saw was, what do you recommend doing as like a high school student if you're interested in medicine, which I think is a great question. I actually have a little slide on this. I'll pull up for reference real quick. Really, right now, your first focus when you're back in school is to get good grades and get into any college. Doesn't matter. You can go to 2-year, you can go 4-year, doesn't matter. And if you want to explore more, I think just like starting out with trying to volunteer and shadow if you can. It can be really hard to get those experiences, especially in COVID, but anything you can do to get yourself into a clinic, into a hospital, you know, just so you can start to see like, what does it actually look like? And if you can't, like maybe, you know some doctors or you meet some doctors or whatever, and they don't have time or they can't because of COVID let you shadow, just ask to do like an informational interview with them where you just sit down, maybe virtually over a cup of coffee and just ask them about their experiences. I think the more people you can talk to, you know, it's it's just one of those things that if you can get to talking to people, I think that's a huge thing. Let's see. I saw one more question I want to answer. So yeah, there was another one about studying and memorization, just like general study tips. I think the best thing for helping memorize is repetition. So practicing things over and over again, whether that's flashcards, whether that's doing practice questions, the more you see it, the more you remember. And also just like the more exposure you get, the better. Like you will like learn a bunch of stuff in undergrad and like in your first 2 years of med school, and then you eventually get to see patients who have that condition, and it makes so much more sense when you see it in real life. So don't stress about it too much right now. Just, you know, just like repetition is really the key. Yeah, so let's see. I think those are the big questions I can answer for right now. Yeah, so I will leave it at that then. So you all can get on to your next thing. But yeah, I'm putting my email in the chat right now. Let me add it to the generic chat. And I can also pull up on the screen super quick. Actually, I'm going to pull it up on the screen because otherwise it's going to get lost in this sea of chats. So real quick, I'm going to share my screen real quick. And again, apologies if you can hear my cat in the background. He's going a little crazy. Okay, here we go. So here's my contact info. Feel free to take a screenshot of that. And yeah, please feel free to reach out anytime. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions or to some of the more specific questions. So yeah, please do not hesitate to email me or reach out via LinkedIn and let me know your specific questions about your specific situation or any questions I didn't get to answer. I love talking to pre-meds. You know, I'm busy, but I love this so much that I make time for it. So, and usually I'm pretty fast to get back to you. Usually, originally it says 24 hours or less. I'd say give me like maybe 3 days at this time because it's super busy. I'm driving back and forth a lot, but yeah, I promise I will get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, it's never a bother. Totally happy to answer any questions. I'm pretty much an open book. And yeah, I'll resend these slides to Davina so she can share them with you if you want. But yeah, it was so great talking to you all. Thanks for your wonderful questions and best of luck to all of you. I really wish you all the best.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon. And like we said, our thank you form will be linked in the announcement that we post after this. So if you guys would like to say thank you to Taryn or any of our other guest speakers for taking the time to come out and speak to us, that will be linked there. The homework for week 2, sent it in the chat, that's also here as well. Couple of quick things before Monday. So on Monday, we're going to be taking a group picture. So if you feel comfortable turning your camera on, or if you know, just a quick heads up that we will be taking a group picture of everyone here. So just be sure to have the camera on if that's something you're comfortable with. Like I said, we have 2 new posts up on Instagram, so be sure to check that out. Week 2 homework is due Monday before the session, so you have the whole weekend to answer the questions. I know that some of you gave us feedback that the first question and the second question were pretty much the same thing and they were a bit confusing, and we totally agree. We went back took out the second question, or took out the first question. So it's just the first two there. And I think that should be it. Be sure to fill out the feedback form if there's anything you can change. Best of luck with your research symposium projects. I'm still in the process of grouping everybody. I think I've grouped everyone so far that's reached out to me asking to be placed in a group. But if not, please send me a message or, you know, respond in a thread or talk to one of your friends and see if they've been put in a group yet. And we'll try to make sure that you all get into a group soon. Our submission form is going to be released over the weekend, so that has all the information that you'll need in order to, you know, submit your projects, enter in your group names, etc. So just some brief things if to, you know, kind of conclude that ramble. So homework due Monday, week 2 for all the guest speakers this week. Group picture on Monday for our very last session, which feels crazy because this program is already coming to an end and it feels like it just started. So homework there, group picture, 2 new posts up on Instagram. Be sure to enter in the giveaway, check Slack for any important announcements. Best of luck with your research, and we will stick around if you have any other questions, but we hope you enjoy the weekend, get some rest, and yes, also another reminder, tomorrow, office hours at noon. If you have any questions about your research symposium stuff, feel free to drop by, we'll be here. And we do have another speaker on Monday as well. She's a nurse practitioner. But if you guys don't have any other questions, feel free to, you know, head on out. Thank you so much for attending today. And we will see you again next week for our very last session.